Preschool always is great. So, yeah.
We will start our program now. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for coming on this busy Sunday. And we had a very wonderful program today because our keynote speaker actually just come back from Taiwan. And before we will start our program now. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for coming on this busy Sunday. And we had a very wonderful program today because our keynote speaker actually just come back from Taiwan. And before we start, we'd like to invite the host of this event is the Chairman Director of this Taiwan Center, and let's welcome David Chiang.
Good evening. Thank you and welcome. First, I will invite you to join me to give Mr. Richardson a welcome applause. He just finished up 10 days in Taiwan and he might have a little bit jet lag. I want to share with you, last time I was here, it was June last year. He made a 90-minute speech. I was so impressed. Believe me, I was so impressed. A lot of Taiwanese history, education, and I'm ashamed as a Taiwanese, I don't know as much as he does. It's terrible. And he just mentioned to me, he made a trip to Taiwan and a doctor entitled up to listen to his speech and say, you know, I consider myself well educated and informed, but what you say, most of them I don't know. So, you know, last time we were here, not too that many people, you know, and my idea was, you know, to get as many people as possible to listen to his speech. Believe me, this guy, I don't know what's in for him, nothing, right? He's a great American. And as far as I'm concerned, a great human being, stand for right and wrong, righteousness, fairness. I have great admire to this guy. Right now we have so many people, and I was talking to him, you know, if possible he should make a trip, travel all USA, just like Formosa betrayed. Let as many people know as possible. You know, last year I was in the premiere Formosa Betrayed show in Los Angeles. You know what Adam Ken, the director, told us? He was standing there and he told us, I didn't know in the 80s there will be some spy agent sent here to kill Americans. This story must be told even if I don't make money as a director. We need to do that. We need to push this if he's agree, you know, he's traveled to show it that Formosa betrayal. How's that? Thank you.
Thanks, David, for the opening remarks. I think most of us, or I would say all of us, all come from Taiwan, or maybe you were born here, but your parents are Taiwan. And we always have the sayings, people from hometown should know what happened there. And he had a travel, this is his first time travel to Taiwan. And he traveled from Taipei to Taichung to Kaohsiung, and then back to Taipei. So it's a wonderful trip. And during his trip, he will share with you the details, what he learned, what he heard. He had a chance to visit also Gukwanmin, Apian, and lots of people in Taiwan. So lots of inside stories he will share with you. But the most important, I think we all agree, Formosa, our hometown, is a beautiful island. But after his visit, after his speech, he probably share with you, is Taiwan a Formosa beautiful island or a purgatory? So it's something worth you to have a thought, okay? So I will not take too much time. Now let's welcome Michael to share with us his speech.
Dakaho. I learned that in Taiwan. There's always also a clipboard going around, and if you have email and you'd like a free subscription to my articles I write about Taiwan, just put your address on and I'll give you a free subscription. I now love Taiwan after having visited the island and meeting all the fine people there. But it wasn't a love for Taiwan that got me started learning about Taiwan. It was because of my obligation as an American citizen. In a democracy, when the government does wrong, it's the responsibility of the people to do right. And about 2 years ago, I was very ignorant about Taiwan. And then I learned about the Roger Lin lawsuit, and I became curious about what are they saying? What about America's role in the history of Taiwan? And I began studying. And I learned that America has a responsibility that it has not lived up to. And more than that, America has failed to protect the human rights of the people of Taiwan. And that's the topic of my remarks. To begin telling the story of America's failure to protect the human rights of the people of Taiwan, it's necessary to look at a little bit of the history. So if you'll journey back in time with me. August 13th, 1945. That was the day that Douglas MacArthur, a general of the Allied forces, issued what they call General Order Number 1. And General Order Number 1 spelled out how the Japanese soldiers would surrender and to whom and where. And it discussed the surrendering Japanese all over the Pacific theater of war. When it came to Taiwan, it was determined that the Japanese soldiers in Taiwan would surrender to the troops of Chiang Kai-Shek. But Chiang Kai-Shek's troops had no way to get to Taiwan. So on October 25th, 1945, the United States Navy landed Chinese nationalist troops on the island. And that's how the Republic of China got to Taiwan. The day before the ROC troops were landed on the shores of Taiwan by the United States Navy, the United Nations was born. October 24th, 1945 was the start of the United Nations. But the United Nations would be no help for the long struggle and suffering that the Taiwanese people would soon face under Republic of China regime. In 1946, the Chinese Civil War was going on. The troops of Mao Zedong were defeating the troops of Chiang Kai-Shek. The Chinese nationalists were in retreat. America was worried about the communist revolution. America was worried that China would become allied with Russia. So President Truman ordered another one of his generals to go to China and try to make peace between the Chinese communists and the Chinese nationalists, General George Marshall. But Marshall was unable to bring a truce to the Civil War in China. President Truman later explained why his peace mission failed. And I'd like to read you a sentence that Truman said explaining why that failed. This is President Truman. The Marshall Mission had been unable to produce results because the government of Chiang Kai-Shek did not command the respect and support of the Chinese people. So already, months after America had landed the Chinese nationalists on the island, the president knew that he was dealing with a bad regime. But did nothing. February 28th, 1947, a date that will forever scar the history of Taiwan, the 228 massacre. The 228 massacre occurred on occupied Japanese territory. That made it a war crime that there's never been a tribunal for, a war crime where the war criminals have never been brought to justice. The Chinese nationalists in Taiwan said, we have a revolt going on. The Taiwanese people are rising up against us. We need more soldiers. And Chiang Kai-Shek just sent over thousands of troops. They arrived on March 9th of 1947, and the killing and the bloodshed began immediately. As the Chinese troop ships arrived to the coast in the harbor there outside Taipei, they began shooting the docks before they even got to shore. And as soon as they landed, they drove trucks down the streets, just machine gunning the buildings, a wave of terror. On March 9th, hundreds of people were rounded up and executed, people that had been identified as troublesome. The doctors, the lawyers, the teachers, the civic leaders. Thousands more were gunned down in the streets simply because they were there when the machine guns were firing. More war crimes that also have gone unpunished. An American naval officer who was assigned to the council, George Kerr, sent daily messages to Washington about the terror that was going on, asking for help that never came. On March 12th, 3 days after the Chinese troops arrived and began the murder, President Harry Truman issued the Truman Doctrine. There were problems in post-war Europe, particularly in Greece and in Turkey. And so Truman said, well, we can't let bad things happen to the Greeks and the Turks. And he announced the Truman Doctrine. Here's what President Truman said about Europe while the killing is going on in Taiwan. Totalitarian regimes imposed on free people by direct or indirect aggression undermine the foundations of international peace and endanger the security of the United States. Well, wasn't that what was happening in Taiwan? Why does the Truman Doctrine only apply in Europe and not in Taiwan? Truman went on, I believe that it must be the policy of the United States to support free people who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or outside pressures. Well, that is what was happening in Taiwan. So the Truman Doctrine only applied in Europe and not in Taiwan, a double standard. Shame on Harry Truman. I used to be kind of fond of Harry Truman. He was one of my favorite presidents, but after I've learned what happened, I've lost any respect. And he was also the president who made the phrase, the buck stops here. He's the one that makes the decisions. Well, the buck stops there, Mr. President. Harry Truman, you're responsible for what happened in Taiwan. You sent the troops there, you were informed by George Kerr what was happening, and you did nothing. Finally, the reports coming from the American Council built up so much that on April 21st of 1947, the American ambassador, Walton Butterworth, sent a memo to Chiang Kai-Shek, a thick memo, detailing the eyewitness reports of the tragedy and the torture and the murder that had been gathered from Americans, Canadians, and British that were in Taiwan. Chiang Kai-Shek said, well, I'll read the memo. This is not what I'm hearing from my troops on the ground. And nothing happened. I don't know if Chiang Kai-Shek read the memo or not, but the Americans did nothing other than give the report to him. March 14th, 1949. Now America's spy agency is into the picture, the Central Intelligence Agency. And on March 14th, 1949, months before the exiled government would come to the island with 2 million more Chinese nationalists, the CIA wrote a report to President Truman titled Possible Developments in Taiwan, and they stamped it secret. And it remained a secret document for years and years and years. Finally, it was declassified. And here's what that secret CIA memo to President Truman said. The native population of Taiwan would welcome release from Chinese control, but it is not now strong enough to stage a successful revolt. In other words, the oppression is so strong, the people cannot revolt. What are we supposed to do? The CIA report went on. There is strong sentiment in Taiwan favoring independence, but the situation is complicated by the conflicting interests of the native Taiwanese and the Chinese nationalist elements. The Taiwanese bitterly resent the performance of the nationalist administration. The Chinese rulers have exploited the native population to the limit without regard for their welfare. This is what the CIA was telling President Truman. United States support to the Taiwanese aspirations would require taking over authority from the established nationalist regime. So once again, nothing happened. The White Terror period continued. The Americans knew about it, and they did nothing but put a secret stamp on it to keep it quiet. Finally, people in the State Department who had read the reports and were shocked at President Truman's inaction began plotting an overthrow of Chiang Kai-Shek. Between March and July of 1949, the Department of State, George Kennan and Dean Acheson, plotted an overthrow of Chiang Kai-Shek. George Kennan said, "We've got to make it look like a spontaneous independence movement in Formosa." Dean Acheson assigned a diplomat to continue the plotting of the overthrow, a man named Livingston Marchant. And he was assigned to implement the overthrow of Chiang Kai-Shek. He studied the situation, and he decided that there was a particular general, ROC general, that was the best candidate to replace Chiang Kai-Shek, General Sun Li-Jin. The Americans made arrangements for General Sun to travel to Tokyo and meet with Douglas MacArthur, who would raise the issue of a coup d'etat. General Sun did go to Tokyo and meet with MacArthur. MacArthur told him, "If you overthrow Chiang Kai-Shek, we will support you." But General Sun was loyal to the ROC and instead went back to Taiwan and reported to Chiang Kai-Shek, "The Americans want to overthrow you." The next month, August 1949, the CIA bought the Civil Air Transport. The Civil Air Transport was a company that was developed during World War II to help supplement the war against the Japanese in China. And at this point, they had a fleet of airplanes. The CIA bought it, and in August 49, it was the largest airline in Taiwan, run by the American Central Intelligence Agency. In October 10th of 1949, the CIA began their secret missions flying into China for spy missions. November 3rd, 1949. Reports continued to come out of Taiwan about the horror of the White Terror period. And so the American Consul General gave yet another memorandum to Chiang Kai-Shek, complaining about the misgovernment in Formosa. Meanwhile, the Pentagon sent military intelligence operatives to Taiwan, and they began their operations alongside the CIA. That year, that the CIA set up their own private airline in Taiwan, and that the Defense Department set up spy operations, both of which worked with the secret police of Chiang Kai-Shek. The United States government estimated there were 10,000 arrests and over 1,000 executions. The American spies knew what was going on and looked the other way. More than look the other way, they cooperated with the secret police that was conducting this terror campaign. Finally, the New York Times had an article about what was going on in Taiwan, because nobody in America knew, because it was all marked secret. The New York Times article said that there was indiscriminate ferocity in the campaign against the Taiwanese people. But that was one newspaper article. Nothing else happened. Finally, May 1950, the men in the Department of State, still sickened by the reports of what was coming out of Taiwan and the inaction of the American government, tried to plan another overthrow attempt of Chiang Kai-Shek. This time it was the Secretary of State himself, John Foster Dulles. He and Dean Rusk, later a top American government official, planned an overthrow of Chiang Kai-Shek once again. And this time, because it involved the Secretary of State, they took their plan to President Truman directly. And he said, "No, leave Chiang Kai-Shek alone." 1 month later, June 25th of 1950, the Korean War broke out, and Taiwan's fate was sealed for the rest of the time up to today's date. The outbreak of the the outbreak of the Korean War caused a huge influx of American military personnel. The CIA increased their station. We had 600 spies in the CIA station office. During the Korean War, the CIA made 15,000 secret missions into Korea and China from Taiwan. For the next 20 years, the CIA director had more authority and more power than the American ambassador. When Chiang Kai-Shek was president, he only met with the American ambassador 4 times during his whole time he was in office. But he met weekly with the CIA because he knew that was where the power was. And his spies had been working with the American spies for years. Chiang Kai-Shek knew that the American CIA would give them money, weapons, and training. All the American ambassador gave them was talk. July 19th, 1950. Finally, the troubles in Taiwan had gotten to the attention of the American Congress. President Truman spoke to Congress about the problems in Taiwan. President Truman said, "The present military neutralization of Formosa is without prejudice to political questions affecting the island." In other words, yes, we're doing what we're doing, but the ROC doesn't own Taiwan, and the fact that they're doing what they're doing doesn't prevent future change. Not to worry, we have it under control. But still, voices in Congress were not satisfied. And now talk got to the United Nations. So on August 25th of 1950, President Truman gave a message to the United Nations about Taiwan. He said, "The determination of the future status of Formosa must await the restoration of security in the Pacific, a peace settlement with Japan, or consideration by the United Nations." This was 5 years after the ROC had been on the island. So the American ambassador to the United Nations, a man by the name of Warren Austin, couldn't understand Truman's message. And so he asked for clarification of what did Truman really mean. So 2 days after Truman's message to the United Nations, he wrote a private letter to Ambassador Austin. Truman told the ambassador, "The Chinese government was asked by the Allies to take the surrender of the Japanese forces on the island. That is the reason the Chinese are there now. But yet, this was 5 years after the Japanese surrendered, so why were they still there? Shame on President Harry Truman for that excuse." Meanwhile, the White Terror continues, and America did nothing. The Korean War was now underway. The Chinese had entered the war. America was desperate not to lose the Korean Peninsula and began trying to get other allies to help the fighting. Chiang Kai-Shek saw his opportunity and said, "I've got 33,000 crack troops that all speak Chinese and they're ready to go." Truman thought about it. We could sure use the help, but would there be any repercussions? And he asked the CIA for their opinion about Chiang Kai-Shek's offer of 33,000 troops. So one more CIA secret report. The CIA told President Truman, the employment of the Chinese nationalists would alienate the other Asian countries, which already consider the Chinese nationalists to be reactionary, politically incompetent, and already repudiated by their own people. So President Truman declined the offer of troops by Chiang Kai-Shek. Why? Because their reputation was already so internationally harmed, the United States wanted no part of it. But did the United States do anything about the bloodshed that was still going on in the island? No. By 1951, the CIA operation had gotten so large in the island, everybody knew, oh, there's the CIA. So they formed a cover operation. They formed a private company called Western Enterprises, and that became the cover for the CIA operations. Negotiations were underway for the San Francisco Peace Treaty with Japan to formally end the war. And the treaty was signed that year and ratified in 1952. But while the San Francisco Peace Treaty was being discussed and signed and ratified, the killing, the arrests, the torture, the beatings, the intimidation, the threats in Taiwan still continued. And the Americans did nothing. It got so bad that the ROC governor of Taiwan, K.C. Wu, went to Chiang Kai-Shek and said, you've got to stop this. Your soldiers are killing the people. And for that, an attempt was made on Governor Wu's life. So in 1952, Governor Wu had to flee Taiwan, never to return. And he lived in exile in the United States for the remainder of his life. And the Americans did nothing. In 1953, the CIA increased their operations with more spy planes, but they were worried about the repercussions of American pilots being shot down. So the American CIA began training ROC pilots to fly the American planes. And they formed a special squadron called the Black Bats. And then another squadron was formed called the Black Cats. And the Black Bats and the Black Cats flew spy missions for the United States government. 148 Black Cat pilots were shot down and killed during the many years that the CIA-sponsored spying continued. The ROC pilots flew P-2s, B-17s, and B-26 planes into China for the American Central Intelligence Agency. And then when the American government developed a new spy plane, the U-2, we trained the ROC pilots for that, and America flew U-2 flights from Taiwan over China until 1974. America cooperated with the secret police of Taiwan because we wanted to use it as a spy base. In 1952 brought a new election and a new American president. Now Harry Truman, with his bloody hands, was out of office. And Dwight Eisenhower was in office. So what happened? Chiang Kai-Shek gets invited to the United States, entertained at the White House by President Eisenhower. He goes over and meets at the CIA with the CIA director while he's in Washington. And he dropped by the Department of State, where John Foster Dulles, who years earlier had plotted the overthrow of his father, said, "You've been a little rough on the Taiwanese people." A little rough? That's what they're talking about, the White Terror, a little rough. Shame on the American government. January 11th, 1954, time for another CIA secret report. This one was called China in the Shadow of Communism. But they quickly decided, well, this shouldn't be secret. This is good propaganda. And they published it into a booklet. And now America learned about two Chinas, Red China and Free China. Except the problem is, Free China, Taiwan, was neither free nor China. The Department of State publication, China in the Shadow of Communism, was simply propaganda, pro-ROC propaganda. Now the Americans, instead of being silent about the atrocities committed in the island, was defending and promoting the regime. Chinese began shelling Quemoy and Matsu that year. Members of Congress said, whoa, what's going on here? It's getting out of hand. And on December 1st, 1954, the Mutual Defense Treaty was announced. January 24th, 1955. Now President Eisenhower makes his own message to Congress about Taiwan. President Eisenhower. Since the end of Japanese hostilities in 1945, Formosa and the Pescadores have been in the friendly hands of our loyal ally, the Republic of China. Friendly hands? The ROC had bloody hands. Shame on Dwight Eisenhower for saying that. America's foreign policy with respect to Taiwan, I call the four doubles. Double talk, double standard, double dealing, and double cross. April 16th, 1955, another CIA report. This one was going to stay secret and remain secret for years and years and years, hidden away from the American public. And of course, the Taiwanese people never had an idea what the American spy agency was saying. This secret CIA report was titled, Morale on Taiwan. Well, I would think the morale of the people on Taiwan, suffering as they were, would be of interest to the American government. But it turns out that the CIA report was not about the morale of the Taiwanese people who were doing the suffering. It was about the morale of the ROC mainlanders. That's what the report was about. Let's read a little from the secret CIA report. Strong countermeasures are being enforced throughout the island against communism, which is being effectively suppressed. Strong countermeasures, effective suppression. Those are the code words for white terror. The Taiwanese have some resentment of the ROC invaders. The CIA was even actually at this point calling them invaders. But I think the phrase some resentment didn't come very close to describing the suffering and the pain of the Taiwanese people. But the psychological factor of the Taiwanese people is of little importance, the CIA said, because the Taiwanese people are largely passive. So the CIA report identified the four groups of people who they were concerned about. The first group was Chiang Kai-Shek, his family, and his immediate circle of advisors, about 100 people. And they said that's the most important group that we should be concerned about. The second group that the CIA said has some degree of importance is the military and security officers. The third group is the ROC government officers. And the fourth group are the rest of the mainlanders. But the CIA said really the only two groups we need to worry about their morale are the soldiers, the secret police, and Chiang Kai-Shek's family and friends. And the morale of anybody else doesn't matter. Secret, they marked it. President Eisenhower read that report, though. At least he was given it. I presume he read it. During that time, there was a senator in the United States by the name of Joe McCarthy. And he began talking about the communists in the State Department and started going after those that cared about Taiwan. Now, a lot of people, and Joe McCarthy's charges were later proven to be false, and his reputation is, but at that time, nobody knew that. They thought he had some secret information. Well, Joe McCarthy actually did have some information. Misinformation that had been fed to him by the ROC government. Nobody really knows that Joe McCarthy's false charges against the State Department originated in Taiwan, originated by the ROC government. That same year, 1955, General Sun, who had been loyal 5 years earlier, 10 years earlier, and had refused to engage, 5 years earlier, and refused to engage in an overthrow of Chiang Kai-Shek. Chiang Kai-Shek had been watching General Sun and said, well, I know the Americans approached him, I don't think I can trust him. And General Sun in 1955 was placed under 33 years of house arrest for his loyalty to the ROC regime. That same year, the Green Island political prison contained 14,000 political prisoners. The American government has estimated, based on ROC official records, that during the period 1949 to 1987, that there were 29,407 arrests that they officially know about, and 4,500 executions. But that doesn't begin to talk about the missing people. When a census was conducted years later, several years later, a missing household category, there were 120,000 Taiwanese people that were missing from the census. No one knew where they were. That's because they were buried in fields, their bodies dumped in the rivers had floated out to sea. 120,000 missing people. When you add the 120,000 missing people and the 30,000 that now they admit were executed and murdered during the massacre and White Terror period, that's 150,000 people killed while the American government did nothing. In 1958, the CIA got a new boss in Taiwan, a man by the name of Ray Klein. And Ray Klein ran the CIA station in Taiwan for 4 years, from 1958 to 1962. He was a drinking buddy of Chiang Kai-Shek. He was the one that Chiang Kai-Shek met with weekly. There was no dirty deed that happened in Taiwan during those 4 years that Ray Klein did not know about. Ray Klein was rewarded for his years of service in Taiwan, got promoted to become the deputy director of the CIA, went to Washington, where he continued overseeing what was occurring here on the island of Taiwan. And then he got promoted in 1969, he became the director of intelligence for the Department of State. For 10 long years, Ray Klein oversaw the misdeeds in Taiwan, knew all about it, and the Americans did nothing. I don't know how many Ray Kleins there are in the American government. I hope not very many, but he was a bad one. On September 1st, 1958, Eisenhower wrote a personal letter to Chiang Kai-Shek. This message sends my warm personal regards to a leader of outstanding valor and highest principle. That was the dictator Chiang Kai-Shek that he was writing that to. That's what he said to him, the killer. Shame on President Eisenhower. He had no business saying that. He had been getting the reports from the CIA. He knew what was going on, and he tells Chiang Kai-Shek, outstanding valor and highest principle. A disgusting period of American history. And that was a year after the American embassy in Taipei was raided by a mob. There had been an incident where an American soldier had been accused of raping a woman, and an angry mob attacked the U.S. Embassy. The ROC secret police saw this as an opportunity, and they let the mob go in and attack. The police stood by while the mob entered the embassy, and once the embassy had been breached, the secret police officers of the ROC government went in, and they stole documents, American documents. Safes were broken, secret American files were taken. Chiang Kai-Shek monitored the situation, and nothing was done. And yet months later, Eisenhower writes this letter about your highest principle to Chiang Kai-Shek. Now it's 1961. A new American president, John Kennedy. Well, John Kennedy is a popular American president, in no small part because he was assassinated. President Kennedy and Richard Nixon talked a little about Taiwan during the debates. They debated what to do about Quemoy and Matsu. Richard Nixon said, well, you've got to defend Quemoy and Matsu at all costs. John Kennedy said, well, you know, those islands are pretty close to China. I'm not so sure that all that important. You know, maybe we could let them go. Let's keep track of what's going on in Taiwan. So the CIA wrote a report to President Kennedy. This report, also marked secret, was titled Prospects for the Government of the Republic of China. So let's see what President Kennedy read that the CIA told him. The CIA said, martial law and a multiplicity of security organs operating under various degrees of secrecy enable the regime to prevent or break up undesirable developments. Undesirable developments is talking about independence. The people who dared talk about independence for Taiwan. That was considered undesirable by the CIA. That's the report they sent to President Kennedy. At this point, troubles were building in Vietnam. The United States went right from one war to the next, and they continued to use Taiwan as their base of operations. They used Taiwan as their base of operations for all of Asia. Taiwan had more American spies than any other country in the world. When Henry Kissinger launched his secret war in Cambodia that the American public didn't even know about, those planes that ran bombing missions into Cambodia flew out of Taiwan, flew out of the secret operations that the American government conducted in Taiwan. Meanwhile, the CIA hired former Chinese nationalist troops in Laos and Burma to open up another front in Vietnam. Chinese nationalist renegades became CIA employees. So what happens? Time for another visit for Chiang Kai-Shek to Washington. In September of 1963, President Kennedy entertained Chiang Kai-Shek in the White House. And once more, a trip to the CIA, where he met with CIA Director Allen Dulles. And when Richard Nixon was president, he also would invite Chiang Kai-Shek to the White House, and a special meeting with Henry Kissinger at the Blair House. And then things changed. Something happened that changed the American relationship with Taiwan. America recognized the People's Republic of China on January 1st, 1979. It was a terrible shock to Chiang Kai-Shek. He had less than 12 hours notice. Immediately, he was notified at 2 in the morning. They woke him up to tell him, in the morning, the Americans are going to recognize the People's Republic. While the American government and public are being informed about the recognition of the People's Republic of China, in Taiwan, Chiang Kai-Shek was meeting with all of his advisors and secret police apparatus and said, we have to change our focus. We've got good control of the island. It's now time to move our operations to America. And Americans began tasting what was happening in the island of Taiwan for so many years. And a secret war broke out in the Chinatowns all over the United States between the People's Republic of China spies and ROC spies that were sent by the plane load over to the United States. And bribery, intimidation became commonplace throughout the Chinatowns of America. In San Francisco, it became open street violence. And KMT supporters came out with long sticks and attacked Taiwanese demonstrators on the streets of San Francisco. And America's colleges and universities became targeted. Taiwanese students that had come to America to study were spied upon on virtually every campus they attended. And if they engaged in any kind of protest activity, the folks back home had to account for it. Family members were called in for questioning. I live in Boston. Mao Ying-jeou went to Harvard in Cambridge, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston. He was president of the student chapter there. He was what they call a professional student. He published a newsletter for all the schools in the Boston area. And at a protest outside the Boston Public Library, he was photographed with a camera in his hand. Now, he denies spying. He says, I wasn't a spy, prove it. I tried to do just that. And of course, how do you prove somebody was a spy years ago? Not very easy. But I did get a message from a woman that had been a student at one of the other schools in Boston. And she said that within a week of her arrival in Boston, she had got a letter from Ma welcoming her to Boston and inviting her to come to a student meeting. But she wasn't at Harvard. How did Ma know she was in Boston? That's what she asked me. Well, I don't know. I think I know, but things were still bad in Taiwan. The freedom movement was starting to the democracy movement was starting to build. The editors of Formosa magazine did lead a march on Human Rights Day in Kaohsiung, but ROC black shirts disrupted the event. There was fighting, and the editors of the magazine were all charged with inciting a riot. The Kaohsiung 8 served long prison terms. One of them, Mr. Lin, been in jail, severely beaten during his interrogation. His mother had been to visit him, saw his terrible condition. She contacted human rights groups outside, and for that, she paid her life. Well, Mr. Lin was in jail, and his wife was up to visit him. Someone entered the home, murdered the mother, murdered 2 of the 3 girls in the house. The other one was stabbed 8 times. Crime has never been solved. But yet the house was under constant surveillance. There was only one entrance into the house. How did a killer get in the house, and for what motive? And on what day did the killer do his dirty deed? On February 28th, to send a message. The battle for control of America's Chinatowns continued, particularly strong in San Francisco. And a Chinese-American journalist by the name of Henry Liu, who had lived many years in Taiwan, had the nerve to write a biography of Chiang Kai-Shek, a not-so-friendly biography. And for that, Henry Liu paid his life. The ROC secret police apparatus hired killers from the United Bamboo Gang. And the ROC spy masters flew to America, stayed in Los Angeles until it was time to come to San Francisco for the killing. The Bamboo Gang killers came in, and Henry Liu was murdered in his own garage in Daly City. The American government learned about it because at this point, the Americans understood what was happening. They knew about the spying on Americans on American soil. They knew what was happening to the students. And Taiwan, ROC, was placed under a watch list, and that triggered the National Security Agency to begin an electronic eavesdropping campaign. And the National Security Agency wiretaps overheard the message, a telephone message, between the ROC spy chief and the killers. Eventually, the killers served a couple of years in jail. 2 of the spy masters served a couple of years in jail, but the trail never went higher. Many believe that Chiang Kai-Shek himself was responsible. I think not, but I think his son was. And many believe that the son directly gave the orders to perform the killing. It's believed that at that time that the secret police wouldn't have done that without approval directly from the Chiangs. Many now credit Henry Liu's murder in Daly City with ending the martial law period. Chiang Kai-Shek was aged, in poor health, and finally I think his eyes were opened at what had been done. And in 1987, the martial law period ended. In 1992, a group in America called the Formosa Association for Human Rights wrote a letter to then President Bush the first and complained about the blacklists that ROC was still using. The blacklists that would keep people out. Any Taiwanese American that was on the blacklist that came to the United States couldn't return to the country. There was still pressure on protesters and dissenters. And so the Formosa Association on Human Rights sent President Bush a letter complaining about the blacklists and complaining about the case of 5 university professors that were suffering back in Taiwan. President Bush wrote back. Actually, President Bush didn't write back. He had the State Department write back, but at least there was a response. And here's what the response said. You know, I think I left that letter in my luggage. Well, anyway, what the letter said was, yes, things still have some work to do, but much has been done, and we're moving in the right direction. That was basically the message back. And by now, it was become a ritual for American presidents to go to the Great Wall. Every American president since we recognized China has gone and stood on the Great Wall. Now we're up to Bill Clinton. And of course, it was his turn to go stand on the Great Wall. And when he had a meeting with Jiang Zemin, he was handed a book by the Chinese leader. And the book was called The Heretic Cult of the Falun Gong. And it justified the persecution of the Falun Gong. President Clinton had no business accepting that book as a state gift. Shame on Bill Clinton. Let's move up to current history. Each year, the Department of State issues a report on human rights in Taiwan. Here's what they have to say out of the most recent report for last year. The U.S. State Department says that for an independent commission to investigate. That's what the State Department report said for last year. So what will the State Department report for this year say about recent events? Well, if the State Department is honest, they'll have to talk about Roger Lin being called in for interrogation for treason charges for having the nerve to use American courts. They'll have to talk about the problems with Ocean Voice Radio in Taichung. And I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. And they'll have to talk about continued activity by the black shirts. Last May, Ma Ying-jeou was going to visit a temple in Tainan. He had to walk through a crowd in the streets. 5 students had positioned themselves right near the entrance of the temple. Excellent position for a protester. They didn't have signs. They didn't throw anything. All they did was raise their voice. And when Ma walked past them, they began taunting him for the problems in Taiwan. And immediately a dozen men in black shirts attacked these students. Someone with a video camera on a tall building nearby filmed the whole thing. You can watch the black shirts attack these students with Ma standing there 10 feet away. The black shirts pushed the students backward, 2 to 3 black shirts on each student. And then the police moved in. And did the police protect the students for their lawful activity? No. The police took custody of the students and dragged them down the streets. And the black shirts filtered out into the crowd. Nothing happened. The students were released after interrogation, and the black shirts got away with it right in front of Ma, right there on the streets of the city, right in plain sight. Black shirt activity is not what a democracy is about. I just came back from a 10-day trip to Taiwan. And with my own eyes, I saw police brutality. I went to visit President Chiang at the Taipei Detention Center where he's being held. While I was waiting to get in to see President Chiang, a police car had driven up and parked inside the gate. I was about a half a block into the prison in a building waiting to go in to see the president. And all of a sudden I heard shouting, yelling, and so I looked out the door, and then I noticed the police car. The police car was parked there, the door was open, and a man was standing between the door and the car itself, doing nothing, standing there totally passively. And a policeman with a helmet and a bulletproof vest was this far from his face, yelling at him, yelling so loudly I could hear him half a block away. And then he yelled louder. And I could see the policeman's face was flush red with rage. His face contorted into an ugly look. And then he shoved the prisoner, shoved him in against the car, and the man's head hit the car. And they pushed him in the car, and the car drove off. And with my own eyes, I got to see the ugly face of ROC brutality. Then I went in to see President Chiang. We were in a small room, but not together. Between me and the president stood a bulletproof glass wall with bars, and he's in it's totally surrounded by cement. I'm totally surrounded by cement. I wasn't allowed to take anything in, not a pen, not a paper. There was no way that I'd had any direct contact with him. There was no way he could have left the room. And we still had 3 guards, one standing right behind my back, one standing right behind his back. And the one standing by him was busy taking notes. But he didn't need to take notes because we had to talk through a phone, which no doubt the 3rd policeman that was watching through a window was recording. All intimidation. Intimidation designed to keep Chen quiet. Intimidation designed to keep people from visiting. While I was in Taiwan, I met with a wealthy and powerful businessman, active in the DPP. Ku Kwang-ming owns a large fishing fleet. We went up to his office, very expensive plush office. His secretaries dutifully bowing. Obviously a man used to leadership. And we talked about international politics. But as I got up to leave, and he stood up to shake my hand, all of the trappings of leadership fell away. And suddenly I was looking into the eyes of a frightened man. And Mr. Ku said to me, "Please help us." Words that I would hear at every stop I went to. The next time I heard, "Please help us," was in Kai-Shek. I'd given a speech, the same speech you've heard, in an open park, 1,000 people present. Afterwards, I was standing near the front as we were getting ready to go, and a man in a dirty t-shirt with bad teeth, a poor man, an old man, came up and said, "Please help us." Again and again, I would hear that. When I went to Taichung, the group I was with didn't tell me where we were headed. I thought we were going to the hotel. We arrived in downtown and went to a building, and all of a sudden I realized this isn't a hotel, it's an office building. We went up in the elevator, and I went into an office. I didn't know what it was. There was desks, secretaries. We went into a conference room. I sat down, and I said, "Well, it's about lunchtime. I guess here's where we're going to eat lunch." And as I'm looking around, trying to figure out what kind of business is this, the station manager of Ocean Voice Radio came in, welcomed me to the studio, and I learned I was at a radio station. And I would later see the broadcast booth. And then he said, "This is our 15th anniversary of illegal broadcasts." And I said, "Illegal broadcasts? How can that be? This is a radio station." To me, an illegal radio station is something that operates out of a van at night and goes from one intersection to the next and is low power. But this was a radio station. And he said, "We've applied for a license 6 times, and we're always turned down." And I said, "Well, maybe there's a frequency problem. The licenses are issued to protect radio frequencies so that one station doesn't interfere with the signal of another." He said, "No, this is a clear signal." I said, "Well, why did they turn you down?" He says, "They don't even tell us." I said, "Well, how can you operate without a license?" He said, well, they come in and they arrest and they harass and they raid. And then he told me that 2 station employees had committed suicide because of the persecution and the pressure. Most recent was December of '08. The station manager in Taipei set himself on fire. Clearly a political statement. I said, well, what about arrests? That must be in the past. That can't be now. He said, no, we had 4 arrests last year. I said, well, what about the raids? That must be in the past. He said, no, they raided us in February, a few weeks ago. And I wasn't prepared for that. I really wasn't. So, there's much to be done. There's much to be done. For myself, I'm going to continue writing, and writing much. I initially was motivated by my desire as an American citizen to try to correct the wrongs of my government. Now I've got the love of Taiwan in my heart, and I've got these images, these requests to please help us. The man being shoved against the car, the radio station being raided. So I'm going to do what I can. What I think that we here in America need to do to help the people in Taiwan is get the Congress to act. The courts have shown us through the Roger Lin case, they're sympathetic. The District of Columbia U.S. Court of Appeals said the stateless people of Taiwan are living in political purgatory. But the court would not act further because the court lacked war power. And President Obama has been silent about Taiwan. All that Obama has ever said is in November when he went for his trip to the Great Wall, is he said he subscribed to the one China policy, and Taiwan was part of China. That's what we get out of the president. So I think it's the Congress where we must act. There's 435 representatives and 100 senators. That's a House with 535 doors. Plenty of opportunity. Every person in this room has got a congressman, a representative, and 2 senators. That's 3 people each of you can contact about the problems in Taiwan. It's been over 10 years since Congress had hearings about Taiwan. It's been over 10 years since the United States had a foreign policy review about Taiwan. And it's time for some action in Washington. And we need to let our voices be heard. So right now, I'd like you to help me practice raising our voice. Will you stand up and raise your voice for Taiwan? Stand up with me. Taiwan! 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 Thank you. Thank you.
I guess we all have seen the movie Formosa Betrayed. So after Michael's speech, I think we are so frustrated. It's hard for us to swallow, what happened in Taiwan, also, in the United States. The government, the executive office, they seem to keep silent, on and on. And this year, Michael, he spent more time to the CIA decode document. So he shared us with a lot of information inside the story. And those are true stories. I believe all of us, all American citizens, it is time for us to focus, to raise our voice to the Congress. We need to ask congressional hearing about the Taiwan status. It's really needed. If we all can work together, I think we should be able to take care of Taiwan's issue. As Michael said earlier, justice delayed is injustice. So we, Taiwanese American, we want the justice happen in our generation. No longer delayed. We can wait another president, and find out more CIA, top secret, how they deal with Taiwan's, could be Formosa betrayal again. So I believe all of us, that's our job. Michael did not know Taiwan before end of 2008. He started to write article for Taiwan beginning of January 2009. And up to now, up to today, he has finished about 130 articles, report. Thank you. He first worked in the Boston Examiner, but now he works in more broader area, that's examiner.com. So actually that covers the national version. So everywhere can read his article. And so for his trip, 10 days trip to visit Taiwan, he's going to share lots of information, what he's seen, what he's thought, and I guess we all believe, to travel 1,000 miles, it's always learn more than you sitting at home to read 10,000 books. Now, in the past, a little bit over 1 year, he wrote 130 articles for Taiwan, and now he traveled more than 10,000 miles back and forth between Taiwan and the United States. I believe he will voice for us more inside story.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, I think next we have the Q&A, please.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much for the thorough research. I mean, I'm sure everybody here feel the same way, and like you said already, we're so educated through your seminar. But I just want to get your suggestions, like how to get other Americans to be interested in Taiwan topic, because I feel up to this point, it's just the best secret about, among Taiwanese. Every seminar I've ever been to about Taiwan, 99.9% of people who showed up in the audience are Taiwanese. And the only way to make it a successful movement is get more Americans to understand what's going on. Any suggestions on what we can do to get more people interested?
For sure.
So her comment was that we need to get more Americans involved in the future of Taiwan, and I totally agree. I'm just doing the best that I can, and all I can say is that we each need to make an effort. There's an American folk singer by the name of Pete Seeger, and he tells the story that if you have a pond, even if everybody's only got one pebble, if enough people throw their pebbles in the pond, we can make an island. When will change come? I don't know, but I do know this. The harder we work, the sooner change will come. I don't have an answer to your question, except we just need to constantly be working more. Yeah.
Any other question? I think we can take few questions. Yeah.
I have the other concern is because Taiwanese right now in Taiwan were educated by falling down, and they will think that they are Chinese. So it's very hard. Even I went home 4 years ago, I was talking to my relatives, young generation. I found that their senses, they are more like Chinese thinking instead of Taiwanese thinking. Like, so even for humanitarian reason, if there's a vote, I really doubt it, because the way that Chiang Kai-shek's government educate already inside it.
Your comments, and back to your comment, that's why I also mentioned going to Congress, because if there were hearings about Taiwan before the Congress, that would raise the visibility dramatically. And then the American news media that's been ignoring Taiwan would have to respond. And so I think that's a good point of attack, is the Congress. About the lack of information, so many Americans don't know. Is it Formosa? Is it Taiwan? Is it the Republic of China? Is it Chinese Taipei? And so that's the level of understanding of most Americans. I myself was ignorant, so I know well Up until 2 years ago, thereabouts, all that I knew about Taiwan was it used to be called Formosa. For some reason, wasn't in the United Nations, but I didn't know why. I'd seen some TV footage once of a fist fight in the legislature, and I'd seen advertising supplements for high-tech businesses in Scientific American. And that was the full understanding I had of Taiwan. I talk to people all the time about Taiwan, just on a one-to-one conversation. And outside of the Taiwanese Americans that I spoke with, I have only met one other American in a 2-year period that had heard of 228, and that was a college professor. And whenever I tell people about it, they say, I never heard that before. So there's much education work to be done.
Well, I think the lady asked a very good question that how to be more attractive. What very ironically is the things happened in Taiwan is it have to happen on last year in August 8th, the typhoon monarch, because the typhoon attract the attention of the whole world. You can see the CNN news anchorman challenge Mine Zhou, this guy. Well, we lose about 650 villagers from Shaolin in the high mountain. And then actually there's about 250,000 of Taiwanese that was killed in last 60 years that would stay in the sky of Taiwan to protect and to present Taiwan. Okay, I would just emphasize it. We have to have some brave and blessing in our mind that, you know, Taiwan will never come. It's there. It's 400 years is over. More than 250,000 people was killed. And now a new incident coming last year. You see, KMT is going down after the August 8th. I think it's a miracle, but it's also a wake-up call for all Taiwanese. You know, it's what I try to emphasize. Without August 8th, you know, the 60 years, there have not many floods coming up. Back to 60 years ago, there's A7 flood. But 60 years over, there's another one coming. It's from the God. That's what I believe. I think all the Taiwanese should have the same believing. You know, together we stand. And Taiwan, Republic of Taiwan, it will come very soon. Well, I would salute to Mr. Richardson. You know, with your heart and effort, even the Beijing, this is what I heard. There's 8 people from Beijing is already set up a protocol against you. So you got to watch out. But you know, it is truly, we should set the first file and we'll keep going on and we can make it. Okay, God bless Taiwan.
Thank you.
Jerry's comments do raise one thing that I'd heard from a number of people in Taiwan, and that's as Ma's popularity goes down, there's concern, since he looks like he won't be reelected, that puts Taiwan in a crisis because people are worried that he might sell out Taiwan to China, and now it looks like he might do it before 2012. So there's much concern in Taiwan about that right now.
I think before we take the second question, we have a couple of things to announce. And first, I would like to see, okay, not more than 2 minutes, okay? Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, I come here to leak good news. Listen carefully. Now, Taiwan people are going to have civil government liaison office in Washington, D.C. very soon, probably within a couple of months. And so far, I understand by last night, we know who is going to Washington, D.C., but I cannot tell you the name of this person, number one. Number two, I even understand what kind of size of this building or this office will be. I was told that 3 rooms. 1 room for this representative, and the second room, conference room, about 10 persons. And another big room, probably can put 10 desks and can have 10 employees working there. And in addition to this, 3 units, there are small unit or the meeting the visitors. So this is what I have heard. Just good news for everybody, and in the future, we need all of us to support this operation, number one. Number two, we're talking about the so many Congress approach. Now, in my hand, I have that name, address, and not the email address, but the fax number, also called the Committee of Foreign Affairs, 47 Congress people. And we need everybody's help to send a fax, to send a mail to these 47 representatives in the Congress, plus their hometown. Some of them have 6 offices, some of them have only 2 offices. If we work together, send our voice to these people, then we can change the tide. We can reach our goal. So this is very simple, leaking a little bit of the exciting information to all of you. Thank you very much. In addition to that, 마지막 건 다이루라 판세야.这个孙先生建议讲，咱加减啦1块2块无要紧，10块5块拢无要紧来小可做一个茶1块钱来互人客安尼啦我若讲因为较歹势所以我唯一开始无要紧，你说过有无拢无要紧但是总是一个心意多谢。
Thanks for CK. I think local Taiwanese actually have done a lot of things. Some of you probably are aware, but some don't know at all. We have a lawsuit against KMT recently, okay? It's regarding the issue of the stolen property assets from Taiwan. It's regarding the gold bond. I had a sample here, just in case you have relative, family member seen this before. This is so-called the gold bond, okay? Chinese government from the Chiang dynasty, they pass on and they issue the bond all over in the world. And big portion of the bond had the market in the United States. And this bond actually sold to the general public. The bond supposed had a redeem date. Unfortunately, before the redeem date, and it become default. So this bond actually is about 20 pounds. In the market, it's sold, well, you can get it from the eBay or anywhere. You can Google, you can check it. And one area you can check is the historical bond somewhere. You can see it. And this is major part of the lawsuit that's going on. If the lawsuit can prevail, go through, I think we can kick out the KMT out of Taiwan because they will go bankrupt. For this gold bond, the issue, the penalty with the interest, with the face value, it could be about 20,000 times of the face value. Okay. Please recall, it happened in Taiwan 1950. 1950 at the time, they convert the old NT dollars into new NT dollars. And it's 40,000 to $1. So if we get a lawsuit, if we win the lawsuit, and it could, 27,000 times. It's possible, but it's ongoing, okay? So watch out. This has happened in San Francisco, and we are suing KMT, okay? So we talk about, the KMT is a party, a state for a long time, but this is a real time. We have to, put in action. I think David has something to.
No, I was going to give some few minutes the 公民投票. You want to have a few minutes, make an announcement?
Hi, Liho. I just want to remind everyone that you should have received the 2010 U.S. Census form by now. Has everyone received the census form?
Yes.
Yes. And you remember to check off other Asian and write in Taiwanese, right?
Yes.
Is there anyone who didn't receive a form? Raise your hand. I can give you one. Okay. And also, we were earlier during the campaign, we were selling T-shirts. We have a few left, so if you'd like to buy one, we have a few in the back. So just come back and say hi.
尽量20块啦，主要是 fundraising for in the effort， 他们需要 funding。然后这样话是有这吼足水的，当互迄个少年的吼，这才5块尔啦，吼。啊，头脸做甲来后壁缀一个，这个我咧甲因赞助伊这个活动安尼吼，多谢。我想大家拢知影，这个活动吼，毋是讲咱这代人咧推动的，是咱的第二代，所以咱有甘心无？吼，大家拢足甘心的吼，这样这第二代，因已经吼去几个所在去迄个 promote。They went to churches, yeah. I went to all the events. Sometimes they cannot go there themselves. If I were there, I help them out to announce it. So please do support them. Thank you.
Okay, now we back to our program. Any further question? We like, okay.
Mr. Richardson, thank you for the inspirational seminar. We were very, very touched. Many of us went to see Formosa Betrayed just recently. And we remember Agent Kelly Jack Kelly. And you remind me of Jack. You flew to Taiwan and investigated all this atrocity and unfairness, injustice, except Agent Kelly left CIA and he packed his package and he left. Well, we hope you continue to be our hero to investigate Taiwan. Having said that, I want to mention that because where I work with many people in the judicial system and with the government officials. So I'm pretty well connected with the American mainstream. I know my congressmen, I know my senators. I can talk to them in person, and that's something we really have to continue to do. I just want to mention that I know that there are lobbyists hired by the wealthy Kuomintang people. There are lobbyists who work in Washington, D.C. They lobby for KMT because they can afford to hire them. Now that, I don't know how we can overcome. Maybe there is something you can suggest that our effort will not be undercut by the lobbyists. Because the true stories will be communicated to our congressmen, our senators. So I just want to mention that.
Question was, how do you overcome the KMT lobbyists? And I'm reminded of something that President Ronald Reagan once said. He said, if you can't make them see the light, make them feel the heat. I think we just have to contact each of our congressmen and senators and let them know that you're going to hold them accountable and you want something and you aren't going to just take no for an answer, and we all have to do that. And a word about the movie Formosa Betrayed. I don't think that Agent Kelly was the hero of the movie. For me, Ming was the hero of the movie.
Any other question? Oh, yeah.
Well, I had a question and also a comment. Maybe follow up on basically what you answered and regarding the question that this lady asked. I think maybe one way to reach out to the just general American public and also raise this awareness is to maybe work together with some other human rights, more mainstream American human rights organizations that are passionate about justice type of issues. Because I think most Americans, like you said, like don't have this confusion about terminology about Taiwan and Republic of China even as a country is just usually not even heard of, right, by most people. And so just maybe working with student organizations and other maybe also older generation organizations so that they will be really get active and put ours on the map in terms of the American mainstream, and also like talk to our American friends, because I think a lot of certain American friends that they're more into politics and these type of issues, they'll probably help us push this type of issue.
Very good suggestion. I think the human rights groups that deal with other issues should look at Taiwan's situation, and we all need to be activists. Yeah.
Oh, and the other question is about what you mentioned about the bond or the lawsuit. Who's the litigant, and you said is it a lawsuit that's held in the U.S. court?
Okay. If you have time while you go home, you can check our website, Taiwan Civil Rights Litigation.com. Taiwan Civil Rights Litigation.com. So there's the very details why we're suing for. And Taiwan Civil Rights Litigation actually is an organization we registered to IRS. We never know that there's a law that you can form an organization just to defend a group of people's their human rights if they have been, violated. So that is the voice for Taiwanese community. In the future, I hope we can work together. Right now, we really need the younger generation. Before we came here, we discussed with Michael, we really need the young professional to join us. This is a tough job to fight against the KMT. The most difficult, most dilemma to all the Taiwanese people is because everyone has a different explanation or different point of view about the status of Taiwan. Someone say Taiwan is already an independent country. Someone say no. If you've been an independent country, what is your government? What is the name of the country? Last year we had two international sports game in Taiwan, Kai-Shek and Taipei. Everyone actually paid close attention to these two events. We are waiting to see what kind of name we are released to the international community. Not Taiwan, not Republic of China. It's nothing. Just a Zhonghua Taipei or something else. We have this game inside Taiwan, inside the territory, and we have no name. So for those who keep saying Taiwan is an independent country, it's hard for people to understand. So, look around if you had a chance to join the other ethnic group, like Tibet. There's just few people in Bay Area. Every year I join your events. Every time a gathering like this, then about 50% is white Caucasian join with them. They bring friends to work together. But, we are very good. We are close relating in our community. Unfortunately, we are poor in outreach to the outside, networking. So we really hope the younger generation can join us, spend some time to check our website, and it's a tough job. It's not easy. We have nothing, okay? We're just individual. But we organize the organization under U.S. law, under IS law. It's tax exempt. You can help us to raise some money. I really appreciate some of here inside this room help us. That's why we can raise the two lawsuits. The first lawsuit actually we held up and sued in the military court. Unfortunately, the military court said lack of jurisdiction, so the case is dismissed. But lack of jurisdiction doesn't mean no jurisdiction. It's just waiting somewhere like a court decision. The judge said the first we had the lawsuit in the Columbia District Court. The judge said she feels sorry for the people of Taiwan. People of Taiwan, in the past 60 years, it's a stateless. We don't have a nation. But some people keep saying we are an independent country. It's really confusing, okay? But the judge told us it's stateless. While we appealed to the appeal court, the judge said, as Michael repeat and repeat, the people in Taiwan doesn't have a legitimate government recognized by the international community. The people of Taiwan live in the political purgatory. That's our country, you know, our family, our hometown. Michael is American. I guess all of us are American. He just touched Taiwan's history about less than 2 years. He raised his voice, speak for us. We need our second generation. Most of us here are about 60. We are old, okay? We need a younger generation to get involved and to, you know, share with your friends. And I know a lot of you could be, you know, specialized, your expertise, law degree or something. Focus on this. The Taiwan status needs every Taiwanese American, Taiwanese around the world's attention. I think you CK something. Just one.
Just 1 minute. Now I'm coming here as the Secretary of Taiwan Civil Rights Litigation Organization. Now look, I'm almost 80 years old. We need a young generation, we need young people to come up and to take my job. You know, I'm too old to do this. But I'm brave enough. I don't care what kind of risk. So I'm doing this job, but I really hope more young generation can join with us and then talk about, you know, this organization. And I can assure you, this is the only one organization that can protect Taiwan people in the world. Who protects the Taiwan people? Which one? Can you tell me the name? No one. But we do. We really care for the Taiwan people. So our organization is trying to protect Taiwan people. So you have that kind of braveness, that kind of guts. Please join with us. I'm coming here as a secretary of that organization. Thank you very much.
There is one thing that can be done that doesn't cost any money. There's a group of 24 people in Los Angeles. They've been doing it since January 19th. No matter what the weather, every Tuesday they go to the federal building and they protest for Taiwan. They put up banners, they pass out flyers, they talk to pedestrians, they give brochures to cars that drive by. And one of them's a 97-year-old woman. They call her Grandma. And they even tell her, well, on the rainy days don't come, and Grandma comes anyway. Lately, Grandma has been alternating. She comes 1 week to the vigil at the courthouse, and then the next week she goes to church and prays for Taiwan. But every week since January 19th, 24 people in Los Angeles are getting the word out. And that's something that can happen. I'd like to see every federal courthouse in the United States have a group going like that.
I think our time's getting close, but here, let me just, you know, ask you a favor. If you had a group, if you need some, you know, the true story of the Taiwan status, because all of us had been educated under KMT's education. We only know about the history between Taiwan and China, but we have no idea about the history of Taiwan and the United States. As a matter of fact, who holds the sovereignty of Taiwan today? Under the Peace of San Francisco Peace Treaty, United States holds the sovereignty of Taiwan. It's never been changed since World War II. The treaty was signed in San Francisco, 1951, September 8, and every year, CK and I and some other friend, we had a press conference in Bay Area. We try to call everyone's attention. You know, if the younger generation, you had a better education, you're much more fluent in English than we old people, I think you can do a much better job. Especially you guys know the Facebook or the Twitters, and we just learn it, okay? We don't know how to fix it. Yeah. So, yeah, I think it's about, yeah.
Can I have a question for Michael?
Sure, yeah, of course.
Michael, I recall last time you were here, you brought up 3-4 names of congressmen very influential in the Congress, and we should keep in touch. Could you give us that? Do you remember?
You were talking about some of the difficulties the older generation has, one of them is memory. What I'd like to do, since I can't suggest names as I speak, would be to put together a small list of congressmen that would be particularly important to hear the message. I'll send that to you, and then perhaps you can share it with the group.
Okay.
My apologies for not being prepared on that point right now.
Just thought of it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I think we will wrap up the program. Before we close it, there's two announcements. One is the paper presented by Dr. Chiang. You know, in Taiwan, they talk about the ECFA, okay? ECFA, it's kind of ridiculous, their proposal, because if they say ECFA, we promote we help people in Taiwan, the economic, why not get the Taiwan to join the free trade agreement first? It's just so simple as that. So in Taiwan, there's a movement. It's ongoing. They need a signature to endorse it so they can get enough quorum. So we need about 80,000 signatures. Whoever haven't signed it or want to sign it, please get the application form from Dr. Chen, Zhang Jianxin. He has the application form, can help you. The last thing I will announce is that whoever wants to join the dinner with Michael, we are going to, right after here, go to the Loving Heart. It's the Milpitas Square. It's a vegetarian restaurant. He is a vegetarian. Okay, I think, thank you so much, and maybe next time. Thank you. Thank you.
各位拜托一下吼，你若同意讲，这个要提出迄个国民投票的时阵吼，拜托恁若手有纸的时阵，拜托恁写下来，我再交互阮。你若无法度写详细的时阵，你若无法度写详细的时阵，才寄来台湾主管队上。咱这收集了，就要寄转去台湾就对了吼。
是唔是我一寡朋友到收椅啊，好无？收椅啊，收起，好，多谢多谢。
食饭的人吼，才有迄个参观的迄个地址的名片啦吼。大家有遮离开，若是要去和这个麦克吼，麦克搁加讲一寡话，互相沟通吼。这个是赔款的工作，所以才有名片吼。若知影有的人当然就比较名片啦吼。但希望几个同乡吼，会当搁和你沟通，和你讲一寡话，和你对了解以及对待宣传吼，会减一寡好处。感谢大家。